personal investigation led you to dig deeper into things, which leads us
Yeah.
to your new book project.
Yeah, well, I was studying all the time, and I about the book. I mean, it was in the '60s somewhere, the late '60s, when I read the Watchtower had come out with a book on its history called Jehovah's Witnesses in the Divine Purpose, from 1959. And I read there that there was a rebellion against Rutherford, and it was claimed that the seventh volume, so to speak, the finished mystery, well, it was claimed that during Russell's time only the officers, that is the president, the vice president, and the secretary, decided on publications, and it was claimed that the opposition there in 1917, they were not happy with that. Well, in the same book, there was a quotation from the original charter, the charter that Charles Taze Russell had the authorities to accept. That charter stated, according to this book, that all books to be published was to be decided by the board of directors. Oh, that was a contradiction, I thought. If the board of directors were to decide on books, how could it be only the officers, the three people who were officers?
And the will stated it should have been the editorial committee, correct?
Yeah. Well, I didn't think about the will at the time, but I saw this contradiction that Rutherford didn't consult the board, whereas the book itself quoted from the charter that books were to be decided by the board of directors duly constituted. So I saw this is, and I wanted to go to the bottom of that, but that was in the late '60s, and I didn't know anything about how to go about that. How could I find this out? How things were?
And finding the documentation at that time would have been very, very difficult.
It was very difficult. I didn't know anything about that, and then of course Macmillan in his book, Macmillan's book Faith on the March, which you must know about, and he wrote that Paul Johnson, while in England in 1917, claimed to be, after that, when he came back, he claimed to be the high priest of the world. And I thought, that is difficult to believe. I would like to find out if this is true. I suspected there is something amiss here. And I wanted to know, but I couldn't know. And then in 1973, I bought a book by an Englishman, an English sociologist by the name of Alan Rogerson, a book called Millions Now Living Will Never Die, about the Watchtower movement. And there, for the first time, he wrote about this situation in 1917, and it was a shock for me. Of course, I wasn't surprised. And he provided addresses to Bible student organizations in America, the Dawn Bible students, an address to them, and an address to the Layman's Home Missionary Movement, and to the Pastoral Bible Institute. And I wrote to them, all of them, and stated that I wanted to know. And it was the Dawn Bible students referred me to Jim Parkinson, and I contacted him. And boy, he sent me a lot of things that were absolutely crucial for my understanding. And also, Also, the Layman's Home Missionary Movement sent me. I asked for these booklets or these pamphlets that were issued at the time, and they sent me a copy of Light After Darkness of the Four Directors and Harvest Siftings Reviewed by Paul Johnson. They sent them to me, and that was in the autumn of 1973, and I read them, and I realized, oh boy, what liars they have been, how they have lied. They had lied. The Watchtower had lied about that period. And I think it was Jim Parkinson who sent me Rutherford's pamphlet, Harvest Siftings, from August 1, 1917. And it was clear that they were dishonest. And I think it was the Layman's Home Messenger Movement who sent me Harvest Siftings number 2. So I had all the pamphlets, and they had already also sent me a pamphlet called Fact for Shareholders, and that was also published in I think in November 1917. These documents, these pamphlets. Well, I realized already back there the situation, how it was, and how they had lied, how the Watchtower had lied about this.
Today we call that fact-checking. And these investigations, if you just look at the facts, objectively, honestly, it leads into other avenues that you wouldn't even expect. And the more you dig, the more you find. It's very, very interesting history.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't surprised when I found this out, because I had suspected that something was wrong. And having seen so many other errors over there, and Rutherford, I already before that, my opinion of him was very low. I mean, he rejected the true understanding of Romans 13 about the superior authorities or the powers that be. I mean, he rejected an absolutely true understanding of Romans 13.
And he did that in order to put the power or the authority in those who he wanted to be in leadership, in the elders, right?
That was obviously, that was the reason. But he rejected the truth. And then in 1962, the Watchtower rejected Rutherford's fallacy and went back to the understanding that Russell had. And I mean, and they had claimed that, well, God was leading the organization. God really helped and led the organization. Well, baloney. He couldn't have Rutherford reject the truth. And not only did Rutherford reject the truth, he hinted that those who didn't accept his folly would go to Gehenna.
So
to second
Watchtower
death.
claims that their opposition was motivated by pride.
Rutherford directed that Russell's notes for a 7th volume of Studies in the Scriptures be compiled into a new book called The Finished Mystery.
On the day that the book was completed and he had a supply in his office, he arranged for the brothers to put one at each table place in the dining room. And so when the family came down to eat, each one had a copy of the book, The Finished Mystery. Some were quite curious about it and wondered what it was all about and enthused about it, but there was already a growing tension in the family because some of the responsible brothers sort of resented Brother Rutherford. Some of them had ambitions for themselves. So they used the occasion to bring accusations against Brother Rutherford for having gone ahead and published this without their permission and their knowledge. And the result was eventually about a 5-hour tirade against Brother Rutherford, where a number brought a lot of unjust accusations against him. Brother Macmillan tells that, well, that day they left the dining room and most of the food was uneaten and the family was very sad.
So Watchtower claims that their opposition was motivated by pride. What would you say to that?
Yeah, well, that wasn't the case. If you're thinking of the 4 directors, they claim that was pride. Well, it wasn't pride. The charter that, Russell had the authorities to approve, and which all Bible students claim to stick to, even Rutherford. Well, it was clear that the organization was to be run by the board of directors. And when Rutherford, he put that aside, he arranged for what we call bylaws to the effect that he could run the organization. And that's so how it was quite natural that those directors would oppose Rutherford. It was in the nature of thing.
Yeah, he had to get rid of the charter. He had to get rid of the shareholders. He had to falsify statements.
But he didn't. He didn't. He couldn't oppose the charter publicly, and he couldn't get rid of the shareholders publicly. But he did, in effect, do that.
Yeah, he falsified his statements about the charter. He said the charter said this, where in fact it didn't say that.
Right. That's, and I bring out that in much detail in my book, how he falsified the charter. And and not only that, in 1920, in 1917 he said, all of the directors have to be chosen annually, according to law. And then 1920, he felt that this annual election of directors, that was burdensome. So he arranged for them to be elected every third year. And the law remained the same. That was absolute hypocrisy.
There is a long list of legal contradiction, not moral, not ethical, just legal contradiction that by law Rutherford was supposed to follow. But it's one of those things, if nobody reports or nobody cares, are you really breaking the law?
Yeah, well, the Bible students didn't. I'm disappointed at the Bible students who went along with all that. Mm-hmm. I'm very disappointed at them. And not all of them. A minority rejected it, of course, and left the Watchtower. But there were so many weaklings, in my view, who went along with Rutherford's trickery. And,
well, they were waiting. Some of them were waiting for reform, to see what would happen. And Rutherford did put good mental arguments into people's heads and intimidation. And I've said this to Jeff in the past. A lot of the people were kind of dependent upon the society, gave up a lot. They had a lot of time invested into this. Do you just walk away, or do you just, okay, let's pick up, shake the dust?
They should have walked away, but they didn't. And
some of his friends defended him at all costs. I mean, look at what Fish.
There was a lawyer
and Bonnet, how they defended him. But Fisher, he at least tried to stand up. You're the one who sent me that letter about the threat of disfellowship for Rutherford going to the burlesque. So that was quite a fascinating document. And yet he got away with it.
Well, at that time, he had them in his pocket. I mean, he could do anything, you know. If there were anyone at the top who would question Rutherford, he would be out, and he would see to it that he was removed. So, I mean, Fisher was an honest man. He realized it, but Van Amberg, Macmillan, what a bunch of crooks. Crooks is the name I use of them. They were crooks.
That leads to a good question, Rud. What was it that, even though Rutherford wasn't on any of the recommended first lists of who to run things, it leaves it very open for questioning, investigation, or whatever you want to call it. When Russell passed away, immediately Rutherford was called, hey, come on in, and was like given an open door, here, come on in and take this over. So do you think this was a premeditated thing even prior to Russell passing away, that they had planned this in advance? Or what made all this happen and just him walk right in?
I don't think it was decided in advance, because I couldn't know when Russell. I couldn't know beforehand when Russell would die. He could leave on a couple.
His health was questionable at the time.
When Russell died, I think Macmillan was the leading. He wanted to have Rutherford succeed, and Macmillan detested the vice president and 3 other members of the board, and who were much better Christians, you know, and much more loyal to Russell. Macmillan is an enigma to me. Perhaps it was because Rutherford could keep him, and he had fallen out with the others. So perhaps it was Macmillan wanted to retain his position at Bethel, and he supported Rutherford.
I see that,
and you know,
the Brooklyn Eagle, the funeral with Russell, the Brooklyn Eagle reports, and the St. Paul Enterprise both report Macmillan's wranglings and arguments about who was even going to participate in the funeral. Macmillan was already wresting control.
Yeah, he did. And one of the things that I saw at once was that he, at the funeral, he told Hoskins, one of the directors, he told him specifically, I have to tell you, I don't know whether you have the nerve to accept it, but I will tell you anyway. I think that you and all the directors except Van Amberg and Rutherford should resign. And if you don't resign, you will be, every last one of you will be kicked out.
That's what they did.
Did that happen?
Yeah.
And he said that at Russell's funeral on November 6th in Pittsburgh. And it was stated, it was brought out in the pamphlet Light After Darkness. And I was looking to see whether Rutherford would comment on that. But in his second edition, in Harvest Sifting Part 2, he answered the directors in many ways, but not on that. So I have to accept that.
It would have been difficult to answer that, because even Abbott in the new St. Paul Enterprise, he states very specifically what Rutherford or what Macmillan was doing for the funeral, trying to wrest control. And that was a newspaper just for Bible students of the time. So it would have been hard to finagle his way out.
I've seen that. Yeah, and Abbott was he didn't like Macmillan. He said, I love Macmillan, but he didn't. And he stated that he was too petulant. He was very, I mean, it is obvious how he felt about Macmillan there. And I put that into my manuscript too, how he viewed Macmillan there. And in my view, Macmillan is the worst one, even worse than Rutherford. I refer to him as Macvillain.
Macvillain.
Macmillan had he in his book he writes, well, Russell called upon him during the late summer of 1916 to come to Bethel, and he asked Macmillan about who he might think would be suitable to come to help him. And Macmillan says in his book that he mentioned a number of people, but none of them appealed to Russell. And since he must have mentioned Rutherford in that respect, but Russell wasn't keen on Rutherford.
Do you have any evidence on that? Because I've heard that before, but what evidence?
I've written a whole chapter, a whole biography on Rutherford, and I think Russell didn't sack. He didn't finish him. He didn't send him away, as so many have concluded. But he wasn't. He would like to have Ritchie, the vice president. That was his choice. But by election, by having him elected to vice president for 6 years, and he was a fellow that would meet Russell's standards. He wasn't one who would put himself above his brothers. He was a very, very capable administrator. So that was obviously Russell's choice, and he expected him to be elected. And not only that, the Brooklyn Daily Eagle brought out, Ritchie is about to be elected president. That they had heard from people in the Bethel.
Wasn't there an article written that Rutherford was elected president and Ritchie vice president?
Yes.
The day after?
You're right. There were a number of newspapers who reported wrong on the election. They reported that Ritchie was elected vice president, which he wasn't. I'm talking about the 1917 election after Russell's death, and there were a number of articles, a number of newspapers who reported that Rutherford was elected president and Ritchie was re-elected vice president. Now,
wasn't Rutherford just appointed as a member of the board of directors? Am I correct with that? I believe I am.
Well, he was a member. He had been elected to the board in 1910.
Mm-hmm.
But now, when so many newspapers reported in 1917 that Ritchie was elected vice president, how could that be? Well, it could be because they had sent them in advance a statement of what would happen, as if it had happened.
So the election was premeditated.
It was premeditated, and this same report also said that he was unanimously elected president. So that was also decided in advance. So
it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing.
I mean, the fact that the newspapers reported that Ritchie was elected vice president, that it must be a statement they got in advance, and then they didn't want him as vice president either, but they didn't expect him to be removed. But strangely, they managed to get rid of him too, because as Macmillan said, all of them should resign or be kicked out. So they didn't want him to be vice president, but they didn't expect it to. So in their report beforehand, they said that he was elected vice president, and at the same time that Rutherford was unanimously elected president. So that shows that it was determined in advance.
That leads to the next question. How was Rutherford appointed unanimously?